Clear your desk. 3 words delivered across a mahogany conference table. In a voice so calm it could have been discussing the weather, Brandon Walsh sat there in his custom-tailored suit that probably cost what I made in 2 months. 34 years old and already playing king of the castle. I'm Thomas Chen, 47 years old. Been analyzing financial statements since Brandon was still figuring out how to balance his first checking account. I don't post on LinkedIn about market insights or thought leadership. I don't give interviews to Bloomberg or CNBC. I don't have a podcast about disrupting finance. I have a reputation, 23 years of building it. One client recommendation at a time. I'm the senior portfolio manager at Apex Capital Management. That's a fancy way of saying I'm the person who makes sure 387 institutional clients don't lose their money. Pension funds, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds, $42 billion under management. All of it depending on decisions I make every single day. My office doesn't have a view of the New York skyline. It's on the 7th floor, tucked in the corner. 4 monitors showing real-time market data from every exchange on the planet. A Bloomberg terminal that's been running continuously since 2001. Stacks of quarterly reports and SEC filings covering every surface. The smell of old coffee and printer toner. For 17 years, I built Apex's flagship quantitative trading strategy from nothing, not with a team of quants and data scientists. Just me, late nights analyzing market inefficiencies and backtesting algorithms, building predictive models that actually worked. The Alpha Core system I created has averaged 14.3% annual returns for 17 consecutive years, through the 2008 crash, through COVID, through every market correction and flash crash. 14.3%. That's not luck. That's mathematics and discipline. And legally, that system was mine. See, back in 2007, before Apex became Apex, when it was just founder Gerald Morrison and 12 employees in a leased office space, I did something that makes compliance officers break out in hives. I retained ownership of the core algorithm. Apex didn't own Alpha Core. They licensed it from me through my personal investment company. They could use the strategy, execute trades based on its signals, charge management fees on the assets. But if they stopped paying the licensing fees, or if they violated our agreement, I could pull the plug. All $42 billion would be trading blind. Brandon didn't know this, or maybe he thought a 47-year-old analyst wouldn't dare fight back. Maybe he assumed I'd just take my severance and fade away like everyone else he'd pushed out. He was the new chief investment officer, brought in by the board 6 months ago to modernize our approach, corporate speak for replace expensive senior staff with cheaper algorithmic traders who don't ask for bonuses. Brandon Walsh wasn't promoted from within. He was imported, dropped in from Goldman Sachs with a resume that looked impressive on paper. 2 years here, 18 months there, never staying long enough to see if his strategies actually worked. That's not career building. That's resume inflation. He showed up on a Monday in September, walking through our Manhattan office like he was touring a museum exhibit. 44th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. He was dressed like every other Wall Street clone. Navy suit, white shirt, red power tie, Rolex that caught the light every time he checked it, which was constantly. He had the kind of face that photographed well for annual reports. Square jaw. Perfect hair with just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom he didn't possess. Teeth too white to be natural. The confident smile of someone who'd never been held accountable for a bad trade. But his eyes gave him away. Cold, calculating, always running the numbers. When he looked at you, he wasn't seeing a person. He was seeing a line item on a spreadsheet. An expense to be optimized. His first week. He scheduled what he called a strategic portfolio review, mandatory for all senior managers. I showed up with my latest performance reports, 17 years of consistent outperformance. When I walked into the conference room, Brandon was already there, standing at the head of the table like a prosecutor about to deliver an opening statement. "Team," he said. his voice carrying that particular brand of confidence that comes from an MBA and zero accountability. Apex is at a crossroads. We've built something impressive. But impressive doesn't cut it anymore in this market. We need to be exceptional. We need to be cutting edge. We need algorithmic trading powered by machine learning and AI. I sat in the back, watching, listening. He had slides, lots of slides, all showing how modern quantitative strategies were outperforming traditional methods. None of the slides mentioned that AlphaCore was already a quantitative strategy, or that it had been beating the market for 17 years. The old discretionary approach is dead, he continued. Human judgment introduces bias, emotion, inconsistency. We need to remove the human element from investment decisions. Let the algorithms do what they do best. I raised my hand. Slowly. Brandon stopped mid-sentence. Yes. Thomas. He said my name like he was addressing a child. AlphaCore is already algorithmic, I said, keeping my voice level. It's been beating the S&P 500 by an average of 6.8 percentage points annually for 17 years. Removing human oversight from complex market dynamics is how you get flash crashes. He smiled. That patronizing smile I'd come to recognize. Thomas, I appreciate your historical contributions, but we're talking about next-generation machine learning, neural networks, deep learning models that can process millions of data points per second. Your system, and I mean this respectfully, is built on decade-old code. It's stable, sure. But stable is another word for stagnant. Stable is another word for reliable, I replied. And reliability is what our clients pay us for. That's legacy thinking, he said. And it's exactly why we need to evolve. The market has changed. Technology has changed. We need people who can embrace that change. He moved on to the next slide. I sat back and watched the room. Nobody else said anything. They just nodded, took notes, agreed with everything Brandon said. After the meeting, I went back to my office and pulled up the licensing agreement, the one I'd signed with Gerald Morrison 17 years ago. Section 14, Termination Clause. If Apex terminated my employment without cause, the license automatically revoked after 30 days. Let him try, I thought. Let him make that mistake. The erosion started small. My name disappeared from the quarterly investor letters. The strategy that had generated billions in returns was suddenly credited to the Apex quantitative team. No mention of me. No acknowledgement of 17 years of work. The weekly portfolio meetings I'd been leading since 2007 got rescheduled to times when I had client calls. I'd walk past the conference room and see Brandon in there, surrounded by junior analysts who'd been with the firm for 18 months, pointing at charts showing my returns, explaining my methodology to people who thought alpha generation was something you learned in a weekend seminar. I wasn't concerned yet. You don't fire the person who generates 14% annual returns. That's basic business sense. But the air was changing. The atmosphere on the trading floor felt different, heavier. The junior analysts stopped asking me questions. The shared calendar started showing blocks labeled Executive Strategy Sessions, Partners Only. 3-hour meetings I wasn't invited to. Then I found the memo, left on the printer. Someone had forgotten to collect it, from Brandon to the board of directors. Subject portfolio management restructuring. Legacy managers creating resistance to modernization initiatives. Current compensation structure unsustainable given available technology alternatives. Recommend transitioning to fully automated trading systems. Handling the Chen situation. Timeline end of Q3. The Chen situation. That was me. I wasn't the senior portfolio manager anymore. I was a problem requiring a solution. I photographed that memo with my phone, walked back to my desk, opened my personal laptop, not the firm's machine. I reviewed the licensing agreement one more time, read every clause, every termination provision, every remedy available if they breached. Try me. Brandon, I whispered. Just try me. If you've never worked on Wall Street, let me explain the soft termination. They don't revoke your access all at once. That creates liability. documentation problems. Instead, they bleed your authority. Death by 1,000 cuts. It started with trading permissions. One morning, I logged into the portfolio management system. Access denied flashed across my screen. I called Robert Kim, our head of technology. We'd worked together for 12 years. He took 4 hours to respond. Hey, Thomas, Brandon restructured the access protocols. Said we needed better separation between strategy development and execution. You're on read-only now. Read-only. I couldn't execute trades anymore. Couldn't adjust positions. Couldn't respond to market movements. I'd been downgraded from portfolio manager to spectator. The final humiliation came on a Friday. Brandon scheduled an all-hands firm meeting in the main conference room. Attendance mandatory. I arrived early. Stood near the windows overlooking the city. $42 billion was being managed in this building, most of it flowing through strategies I'd created. Brandon walked to the front of the room. Wireless microphone. Confident smile. The board members sat in the first row. Gerald Morrison, our founder, among them. Looking uncomfortable, but saying nothing. Everyone, thank you for being here, Brandon began. Today marks a new chapter for Apex Capital. We're implementing a complete technology overhaul. State-of-the-art AI-driven trading systems. This will position us at the forefront of quantitative investment management. People were nodding. Some were smiling. Like this was good news. But to get there, we need to make some difficult decisions. The market has evolved. Client expectations have evolved. And frankly, some members of our team haven't evolved with them. He paused for effect. Looked directly at me. Thomas Chen. Could you please come up here? The room went silent. 200 people turned to look at me. I could hear the air conditioning, someone's phone buzzing. The city traffic 42 stories below. I walked to the front. My shoes clicked on the marble floor, each step measured, controlled. When I reached Brandon, he had that look, that expression of victory. Thomas, your tenure at Apex has been long. You built something here, something we're grateful for. But our analysis shows your approach no longer aligns with where this firm is headed. Effective immediately. We're terminating your employment. HR will process your severance package. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. He said it into the microphone. Made sure everyone heard. 23 years, reduced to a performance review. I didn't react, didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. My tone was flat when I spoke. I understand, I said. Have you reviewed the licensing agreement for AlphaCore? What licensing agreement? Brandon asked. His smile faltered just slightly. The one I signed with Gerald in 2007. The one that states Apex licenses the trading algorithm from my investment company. The one that automatically terminates if I'm fired without cause. Brandon's expression shifted. Confusion. Then annoyance. All intellectual property developed during employment belongs to Apex, he said. Standard employment contract. Legal reviewed everything. Interesting, I said, because AlphaCore was developed before I joined Apex, and the licensing agreement predates my employment contract. You might want to check with legal again. The smile was completely gone now. HR has your severance package ready, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Security. Please escort Mr. Chen out. 2 security guards appeared, young, uncomfortable, probably wondering how they ended up in the middle of this. I turned and walked toward the elevators. Past the trading desks, past the analysts who suddenly found their computer screens fascinating, past the conference rooms with their Bloomberg terminals and market data. The elevator doors closed. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel. Still composed, still in control. Brandon thought it was over. He thought he'd won. I pulled out my phone and texted my attorney. Margaret, this is Thomas. Execute the termination notice per our agreement. File it with Apex Legal and the board. Do it now. Margaret Chen, no relation, was my corporate attorney. We'd been preparing for this possibility since 2007. She knew every clause in that licensing agreement, every trigger, every consequence. She responded within seconds. Filed. 30-day notice begins today. Clock is ticking. I walked out of the building into the Manhattan afternoon, got in my car, drove home to Connecticut, made coffee, and waited. What Brandon didn't know, what nobody at Apex knew except Margaret and me, was that Alpha Core wasn't just a trading strategy. It was the trading strategy. $42 billion in assets, 387 institutional clients, all of it running on my algorithm. The licensing agreement was clear. Termination of my employment without cause triggered automatic license revocation in 30 days. Without Alpha Core, Apex had nothing. No proven strategy, no track record, no competitive advantage, just a building full of expensive analysts with no way to generate returns. I sat in my home office and watched the phone. 5 missed calls within an hour, 10, 20, all from Apex numbers. I didn't answer. I had a book to read, a single malt to enjoy, and exactly 29 days, 23 hours before $42 billion stopped generating returns. Let Brandon scramble. Let him panic. Let him learn that sometimes the quiet guy in the corner office isn't there because he can't compete. He's there because he owns the foundation everything else is built on. The first real call came at hour 8. Gerald Morrison, the founder. The man who'd shaken my hand 17 years ago and promised me equity and respect. I answered on the 5th ring. Gerald. Thomas. His voice was tight. Controlled panic underneath every word. We received a notice from your attorney about the Alpha Core licensing agreement. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. I said. Brandon fired me in front of the entire firm. Section 14 of our agreement is very clear. Termination without cause revokes the license. Thomas, please. We can fix this. Brandon acted prematurely. The board will reinstate you, managing director position, 20% raise, whatever you want. I sipped my coffee. Gerald, I've been waiting for this call. But the clock doesn't stop. You have 29 days. 15 minutes later, another call. Andrew Mitchell, general counsel at Apex, the lawyer who'd supposedly reviewed everything. Mr. Chen, this is Andrew Mitchell. I'm reviewing the documents your attorney filed. There seems to be a discrepancy regarding intellectual property ownership. Not a discrepancy, I said calmly, a fact. I developed Alpha Core in 2006. Before joining Apex, the licensing agreement grants Apex usage rights, not ownership. That agreement terminates when I'm fired without cause. Silence. Then, Mr. Chen, do you understand the implications of this action? 387 clients, $42 billion in assets, thousands of investors whose retirements depend on consistent returns. I understand perfectly. I said, I also understand that Brandon Walsh stood in front of 200 employees, called my work obsolete, terminated me to make room for untested AI systems. He made a calculation. Now he gets to live with the result. We can offer enhanced severance, stock options, a consulting arrangement. I'm not interested in working with people who fire me to impress the board. You have 29 days to transition to a new strategy. I suggest you use the time wisely. I hung up. The next 72 hours unfolded like a slow-motion market crash. I was watching from the sidelines. My phone became a constant vibration. Texts, emails, voicemails. LinkedIn messages from people I hadn't spoken to in a decade. I ignored most of them, but I couldn't resist reading the messages from people still inside Apex. The ones sending me real-time updates of the meltdown. Hour 12, Robert from Technology. Thomas, you need to see this. Brandon's been in the quant lab for 6 straight hours, screaming at the team to reverse engineer Alpha Core. They keep telling him it would take 3 years minimum. He's not listening. Just keeps yelling about machine learning and neural networks. HR is getting complaints. Hour 15, a forwarded email chain. Someone leaked to me. From Brandon to the entire quantitative team. Urgent priority. I need full documentation of AlphaCore's trading logic by end of day. Source code, decision trees, risk parameters, everything. No excuses. I actually laughed. The source code was encrypted. The documentation was intentionally incomplete. And the core algorithm existed only in my personal repository. Good luck with that. Brandon. Hour 18. Sarah Mitchell. One of the junior analysts I'd mentored for 3 years. Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry. We didn't know about the licensing agreement. None of us did. Brandon told everyone in the morning meeting that legal had cleared everything. That you were just upset about being let go, that you'd signed away all rights when you joined the firm. Now we're finding out he lied. About everything. Half the portfolio team is updating their resumes. Hour 21. A screenshot from the Bloomberg terminal. Apex Capital stock down 18% in after-hours trading. The rumor mill was already churning. Whispers about leadership chaos. Key personnel departures. Institutional clients asking questions. Hour 24. Diana Park, the chief financial officer, left a voicemail that was equal parts professional and desperate. Thomas, this is Diana. The board convened an emergency session at 8 p.m. 17 institutional clients have called demanding explanations. 3 are threatening to initiate redemptions immediately. We're talking $8 billion in potential outflows. Please call me back. We need to discuss a path forward. Whatever you want. Name it. I didn't respond. I was too busy reviewing 17 years of documentation. Every quarterly letter I'd written to clients. Every performance attribution report. Every presentation to the investment committee. Building my case. Making sure every piece of evidence was organized and accessible. Hour 30. Another leaked email. This one from Andrew Mitchell. General Counsel. To the board. Subject legal exposure. Chen situation. After thorough review of employment records and IP documentation, I must inform the board that Mr. Chen's claims appear legally sound. The AlphaCore licensing agreement predates his employment contract. It was executed between Apex and Chen Investment Partners, LLC. Section 14 clearly states, termination for cause requires specific performance failures documented over 90 days. Mr. Walsh's termination was immediate and based solely on strategic disagreement. This likely qualifies as termination without cause. Recommend immediate settlement negotiations. Potential liability exposure substantial. I saved that email, forwarded it to Margaret, told her to add it to the file. Hour 36. Brandon finally sent a direct email. Subject line, we need to talk now. Body. You're destroying hundreds of people's careers and futures over wounded pride. This is beneath someone of your experience and stature. Be the bigger person here. I read it twice, then deleted it. Beneath me, Brandon had stood in front of 200 employees, called my 17 years of work obsolete, called me resistant to change, terminated me to demonstrate to the board that he could make tough decisions, fired me to prove he was worthy of his title. He'd calculated that I would take my severance package and fade away, that I was too risk-averse to fight, too old to start over, too tired to care. Every calculation was wrong. Hour 42. Robert again. You won't believe this. Brandon just tried to access your old office. Wanted to search for documentation. Security stopped him. Apparently, Gerald gave explicit instructions that nothing in your space could be touched until legal review was complete. Brandon lost it. Started yelling about obstruction, about how he's the CIO and has authority. They escorted him out of the building. Hour 48. A message from Gerald Morrison himself, Thomas. I need to speak with you, not as CEO, as someone who's known you for 17 years. Please call me. I didn't call. Not yet. Let him sweat. Let him understand what it feels like to be powerless. Hour 54, the Wall Street Journal published a story. Senior portfolio manager departs Apex Capital. Amid strategic disagreement. The article was carefully worded, mentioned my track record, noted the unusual timing, quoted anonymous sources saying there were questions about intellectual property ownership. Within 2 hours, every financial news outlet had picked it up: Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC. The story was growing. Hour 60. 3 more clients sent redemption notices, $4 billion, exiting over the next 90 days. Hour 66. Brandon sent another email, this one to the entire firm, attempting damage control. Team. I want to address the rumors circulating about recent personnel changes. Thomas Chen's departure was a mutual decision based on strategic differences. His contributions to Apex are valued and appreciated. We remain confident in our quantitative capabilities and our ability to deliver exceptional returns. Stay focused. Stay disciplined. Trust the process. Hour 72. Sarah forwarded me the responses people were posting in the company's Slack. Nobody believed him. The analysts were openly discussing exit strategies. The traders were worried about bonuses. The support staff was updating LinkedIn profiles. Brandon had lost the room, lost credibility, lost control. And the 30-day clock kept ticking. At day 7, Gerald called again. Not in the morning, late at night. 11:47 p.m. His voice was different, hollow, completely defeated. Thomas, he said quietly, almost whispering. Brandon has been suspended pending investigation. The board voted unanimously at 7 p.m. today. We want to reinstate you immediately. Chief Investment Officer position, Brandon's job, his office, his compensation package. Base salary $1.2 million. Full carry interest on fund performance. Equity grant worth $3 million at current valuations. I stood at my window, looking out over Long Island Sound, lights from boats moving slowly across dark water. The moon reflecting off the surface, people living normal lives, going about their business, unaware that $42 billion was hanging in the balance 3 miles away. Gerald, I said, and my voice had no warmth in it whatsoever. Brandon didn't just fire me. He publicly humiliated me in front of every employee, every colleague I'd worked with for 17 years. He called my life's work obsolete legacy thinking. Did it in front of the board to show he could make tough decisions. Sacrificed me to demonstrate his leadership. He calculated that I was too old and too comfortable to fight back, that I'd take my severance and disappear quietly like everyone else he's pushed out. There was silence on the other end. I could hear Gerald breathing, could hear ice clinking in a glass. Probably his third scotch of the night. So what happens now, he finally asked, his voice barely audible. In 23 days, Titan Shield goes dark. I said, wait, wrong script. In 23 days. Alpha Core stops generating signals. The licensing agreement terminates at exactly 9 a.m. Eastern. $42 billion will be trading without direction. No strategy, no edge. No reason for clients to stay. You'll be running portfolios based on what? Exactly Brandon's untested AI system that doesn't exist. His machine learning models that are pure vaporware. Thomas, please. Gerald's voice cracked. There are 400 employees at this firm, people with families, mortgages, children's college tuition. You're going to destroy all of them because of one man's mistake. One man's mistake, I repeated. Let the words hang there. Gerald, you hired him. You brought him in, gave him authority to restructure the firm. You sat in that meeting room and watched him fire me. You didn't say one word, not one word of objection. So don't lecture me about one man's mistake. This was institutional. This was cultural. This was Apex Capital deciding that 17 years of loyalty and performance mattered less than impressing the board with cost optimization. "There has to be another way," Gerald said desperately. "There is," I replied. "But it doesn't involve me coming back to Apex. It doesn't involve pretending this didn't happen. It doesn't involve protecting anyone's reputation. The firm you built died the moment Brandon stood on that stage. What happens next is entirely your choice." "What do you want?" Thomas Gerald asked, his voice breaking. "Just tell me what you want, and we'll make it happen. Anything." "I want AlphaCore back," I said simply. "Full ownership transfer. All rights. All documentation. All proprietary code. All historical performance data. All client relationships directly tied to the strategy. I want Apex to publicly acknowledge that AlphaCore was never your property, that you've been licensing it from me since 2007, and that you violated the licensing agreement by terminating me without cause. I want a formal written apology from the board, and I want Brandon Walsh's termination to be permanent, made public, with full disclosure of why: breach of fiduciary duty. Fraudulent misrepresentation. The real reasons, not some corporate press release about pursuing other opportunities. That would destroy the firm," Gerald said. "The firm is already destroyed," I replied calmly. "You just haven't accepted it yet. Without AlphaCore, you have no competitive advantage, no proven strategy, no track record to pitch to new clients, no reason for existing clients to stay. I'm offering you a path forward, 90 days to develop or acquire a replacement strategy, a transition period to minimize client disruption, but it starts with acknowledging the truth. You built a $42 billion business on my algorithm, then you threw me away to cut costs. Now you pay the consequences." Gerald was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing, could hear the ice in his glass, could hear the clock ticking on his wall. "I'll take it to the board," he finally said. "Emergency meeting tomorrow morning." "You do that," I said. "You have 22 days and 16 hours. I hung up and poured myself another glass of wine. My hands were perfectly steady, my heart rate normal. Traders don't panic. We calculate probabilities, assess risk, execute when the odds favor us. And sometimes, the best trade is watching other people realize they never understood the game they were playing. Day 8. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story. "Crisis at Apex Capital, star managers exit threatens billions." The article was detailed, devastating. Someone had leaked, probably multiple someones. The piece quoted former employees anonymously, described the all-hands termination, referenced the licensing agreement, mentioned my 17-year track record, included comments from industry analysts questioning Apex's ability to replace such consistent performance. Day 9. Bloomberg Terminal News flashed red. Breaking Apex Capital CIO, Walsh suspended, amid IP dispute. Multiple clients initiating redemptions. The article was worse. It had numbers. $8 billion in redemption notices received. Another $12 billion in clients requesting urgent meetings. Stock price down 32% from the previous Friday. Day 10. Financial Times picked it up. Quantitative strategy. Ownership. Battle exposes Wall Street vulnerabilities. The think pieces started. Industry experts weighing in. Discussions about intellectual property and finance. Questions about who really owns trading strategies. Debates about employee rights versus firm ownership. My phone became unusable. Journalists requesting interviews. Competitors offering jobs. Headhunters smelling blood in the water. Former colleagues asking if I was okay. Day 11. CNBC ran a segment. The anchors discussed it for 12 minutes, brought in a legal expert who analyzed the licensing agreement. The expert's conclusion: I was probably right. The agreement appeared enforceable. Apex's position looked weak. Day 12. 3 more major clients pulled assets. $12 billion. Total redemptions now reach $20 billion. Almost half the firm's assets under management. Gerald called that night. "Thomas, I need you to watch what you're about to see. The board meeting is in 2 hours. I'm sending you the settlement terms we're prepared to offer. Please review them seriously. The email arrived 5 minutes later. 43 pages of legal documents. Margaret reviewed them first. Then I read them. Every clause, every provision, every acknowledgement. It was everything I'd asked for. Full ownership transfer of Alpha Core, the public acknowledgement of the licensing relationship, formal apology from the board, Brandon's permanent termination, 90-day transition license for $15 million, plus consulting fees at $8,000 per hour, no non-disparagement clause, no gag order. I had them, completely. Day 13. The board approved the settlement unanimously. 9 a.m., Gerald called to confirm. Thomas, the board has accepted your terms. Full ownership transfer of Alpha Core technology, all associated documentation, all client relationships, public acknowledgement of the licensing arrangement. Written apology from the board of directors. Brandon Walsh has been terminated for cause. Specifically, fraudulent misrepresentation to the board and clients regarding intellectual property ownership. His voice was empty, drained of everything. Please. He continued. We need the 90-day transition license. We're prepared to pay $15 million, plus consulting fees to help us develop an alternative strategy. What about Brandon, I asked. Brandon is facing multiple lawsuits, Gerald said. Shareholder derivative suit for breach of fiduciary duty. Class action from employees whose stock options are worthless. The SEC has opened a formal investigation into whether he made material misstatements to clients and regulators. His legal exposure is, conservatively, 8 figures. His career in finance is finished. I let that sink in. Brandon Walsh, the golden boy from Goldman, the confident CIO who thought firing me would demonstrate his leadership, now facing lawsuits, investigations, professional ruin, and the firm I asked. Gerald sighed. We'll survive. Barely. We've lost $24 billion in assets. 56% of our client base. Most of our senior talent is leaving. We'll need to rebuild from scratch. It'll take years. I felt no satisfaction, no victory. Just a quiet sense that justice, however expensive, had been served. I'll sign the settlement, I said, and I'll honor the consulting arrangement, 90 days, $8,000 per hour. I'll help you build something sustainable. But I'm not coming back to Apex. That chapter is closed. I understand, Gerald said. Thank you, Thomas, for that, at least. 3 days later, I met Gerald at a steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan, the old homestead. Private room on the second floor, leather chairs, dark wood paneling, the smell of aged beef and old money, neutral territory, far from Apex's offices, far from the trading floor where everything had fallen apart. Gerald walked in at exactly 7 p.m., looking like he'd aged 20 years in 2 weeks. His suit was expensive but wrinkled, his tie slightly askew, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. His hands trembled slightly when he set his briefcase on the table between us. He ordered a scotch. Neat. Didn't wait for me to order. Just needed something to steady himself. You won, he said simply. No preamble. No small talk. Just sliding a thick folder across the white tablecloth. Complete asset transfer agreement. He continued, his voice hoarse like he'd been yelling or crying or both. Apex releases all claims to Alpha Core technology, all derivatives, all related intellectual property, all source code, all historical performance data, all client relationships directly attributable to the strategy. Full ownership transfers to Chen Investment Partners, LLC. You get 90 days consulting fees at $8,000 per hour. We estimate 300 billable hours for knowledge transfer. We both sign mutual releases. Move forward separately. I opened the folder carefully. 47 pages of dense legal language. Margaret had already reviewed every word, annotated every clause, flagged every provision that needed attention. But I read it again anyway, because every word mattered. Every comma counted. This was 17 years of my life being returned to me. It was all there. My algorithm, my performance track record, my client relationships, my legacy, finally, legally, irrevocably mine. And Brandon, I asked, without looking up from the documents. Gerald's jaw tightened, muscles flexing visibly under his skin. His knuckles went white around his Scotch glass. Then he forced himself to relax, took a long drink, set the glass down with exaggerated care. Marcus Chen is facing 3 separate lawsuits, he said. Each word measured, controlled. A shareholder derivative suit for breach of fiduciary duty. They're alleging he knowingly misrepresented the firm's ownership of core intellectual property. That's fraud in the inducement, potential damages in the hundreds of millions. He paused, took another drink. There's also a class action from Apex employees, everyone who held stock options that became worthless when the firm's valuation collapsed. They're arguing Brandon's actions constituted gross negligence at minimum, willful misconduct at worst. That suit is seeking $200 million in damages, and I prompted because I knew there was more. And Nexus Corporation, he said with something between a grimace and a bitter smile. No, wait. That's the wrong script again. Let me fix this. And the board itself has filed suit against him. Gerald continued. For fraudulent inducement, Brandon explicitly represented to us that all IP issues had been cleared with legal, that your employment contract gave Apex full ownership of Alpha Core. He put that in writing in multiple board presentations. Our damages are, conservatively, the lost client assets, $24 billion in redemptions, plus lost management fees, plus reputational harm. We're seeking $500 million. Gerald's expression darkened even further, his eyes distant, remembering something painful. We also discovered something when legal did the post-mortem. Brandon had been planning this for months. We found emails he thought he'd deleted, communications with his old colleagues at Goldman, discussing how to eliminate what he called dead weight compensation. That was you, Thomas. You were dead weight to him, a 17-year veteran earning a 7-figure salary, when he could hire 3 junior quants for half the cost. He paused again, looking at me with something that might have been respect, or might have been fear, or might just have been exhaustion. He specifically calculated that firing you would increase EBITDA by approximately $3 million annually. He presented that to the board as operational efficiency, cost optimization. What he didn't present was the licensing agreement, that minor detail that you owned, the only thing generating returns. He gambled. You were too risk-averse to fight, too comfortable to walk away from your salary and benefits, that you'd take severance and disappear quietly. I looked up from the documents, met Gerald's eyes directly. He gambled wrong. Yes, Gerald said, letting out a long breath. He did. And now his name is going to be taught in every business school in America. Brandon Walsh, the CIO who destroyed $42 billion in client assets. Because he didn't read a 17-year-old licensing agreement. His career in finance is over. His reputation is destroyed. No firm will ever hire him, not for trading, not for analysis, not even for investor relations. Gerald finished his scotch, signaled for another. The SEC investigation is still ongoing, he added. They're looking at whether his statements to clients constituted securities fraud, whether he knowingly made material misstatements about the firm's capabilities. That's potential criminal liability, not just civil. I let that information settle. Brandon Walsh, the golden boy, the rising star, the confident young executive who thought he could optimize his way to success, now facing lawsuits totaling nearly $1 billion, federal investigation, professional extinction, possible criminal charges. I picked up the pen Gerald had brought. Mont Blanc, heavy, expensive. The kind of pen you use to sign documents that matter. I signed my name on every required line. Slowly, deliberately. My signature felt heavier than usual. Like I was signing something more than a legal agreement, This was vindication, recognition, justice. I slid the signed documents back across the table. Pleasure doing business with you, Gerald. Gerald gathered the papers carefully, methodically, like each page weighed 10 pounds. Before he stood to leave, he looked at me one final time, his expression unreadable. Regret, maybe. Respect, possibly. Or just complete exhaustion, for what it's worth. Thomas, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the background noise of the restaurant. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I should have protected you. Should have questioned Brandon's tactics from the very beginning. Should have remembered that you built this firm. Before the board expansion, before the growth capital, before we became whatever we are now. You deserve better than what happened. Better than what I allowed to happen. I nodded slowly. Some apologies come too late to repair the damage. Some bridges burn completely. Can't be rebuilt with words. I know. I said simply. Gerald left. I stayed. Ordered dinner. Sat alone in that private room for another hour, thinking about 17 years, about what I'd built, about what had been taken, about what I'd just reclaimed. The folder sat on the table. 47 pages of legal language, my life's work returned to me, on paper, official, binding. I finished my meal, paid the bill, walked out into the Manhattan night. The city was alive, traffic, people, lights, everyone rushing somewhere, living their lives, unaware that a quiet battle had just ended, that justice, however expensive, had been served. Here's what Gerald and Brandon and the entire board never understood. Even if Brandon hadn't fired me, he still would have failed. 2 weeks before the termination, I'd filed patents for AlphaCore 2.0, a next-generation strategy using actual machine learning, not the buzzword version Brandon talked about. Real adaptive algorithms that learned from market regime changes. Trading strategies degrade. It's inevitable. Market conditions shift. Correlations break down. What works for 17 years won't work forever. AlphaCore 2.0 solved this with self-adjusting risk parameters, dynamic factor models, real-time regime detection. It was everything Brandon claimed to want, built by someone who actually understood markets. 100% owned by my investment company, fully patented, ready to launch. Brandon thought he was upgrading to a Ferrari. He was actually throwing away the only engine that worked. While I sat on the actual Ferrari in my garage, 4 weeks after the settlement, I went back to Apex one last time to collect personal items from my office, files, research notebooks, a photo of my daughter's college graduation. The trading floor felt different, empty. The energy was gone. Half the desks were vacant. People had left, taken jobs at competitors. The brain drain had already started. Brandon's office was dark, his name removed from the directory, his desk empty. Even his Bloomberg terminal had been reassigned. I saw Sarah near the coffee station. She looked like she wanted to apologize. Don't. I said gently. You did what you had to do. I understand. What happens to Apex now? She asked. I don't know. That's not my problem anymore. But if you're smart, start looking elsewhere. 90 days isn't enough time to rebuild what took 17 years to create. I collected my things and left. Didn't look back. Some chapters end, so new ones can begin. 6 weeks later, I got a call from Robert Kim, the tech director. Thomas. It's been a while. Listen, 8 of us from the old team. We're starting our own fund, institutional focus, quantitative strategies, no outside interference, no corporate politics. Want in? I smiled. Absolutely. When do we start? His response was immediate. Yesterday. We've got seed capital from 3 former Apex clients. Just need our strategy architect. I packed my laptop, drove into the city, started building. 3 months later, Alpha Core 2.0 launched with our first 5 clients, $2 billion in initial assets, all from institutions that left Apex. 6 months after that, we had 12 clients, $8 billion under management, profitable from day one. 1 year later, we had 24 clients, turned down our first acquisition offer because we weren't interested in selling what we'd built. Here's what I learned. Wall Street talks about innovation, disruption, next generation thinking. But the moment someone actually protects their work, refuses to be erased quietly, fights back when wronged, suddenly you're difficult, not a team player, resistant to progress. What they really want is compliance disguised as innovation. They want you to build empires, while they own everything, and can discard you when your salary becomes inconvenient. Brandon thought he was optimizing the firm, cutting costs, modernizing operations. What he actually did was prove that some people aren't line items on a spreadsheet. They're the foundation everything else stands on. Remove the foundation and everything collapses. The patents were mine. The strategy was mine. The clients who mattered followed me, and I was just getting started. Before I go, let me say this. If you enjoyed watching Wall Street Arrogance get the reality check it desperately needed, hit that subscribe button and upvote this post. Stories about actual justice still matter, even in a world drowning in corporate speak. Now for the lesson that cost Apex Capital $42 billion to learn. Read your contracts. Every single word, every clause, every provision, every footnote that seems like legal boilerplate, especially the parts about intellectual property, ownership versus licensing, termination conditions. If you create something valuable, a strategy, a system, a methodology that generates real results, protect it, document it, own it if possible. Don't assume loyalty flows both ways. On Wall Street, it flows in one direction, toward profit, never toward the people who generate it. Real power doesn't announce itself with corner offices and titles. Real power builds quietly, creates value that's impossible to replace, documents everything, and when pushed too far, acts with precision. Brandon Walsh learned this lesson. It cost him his career and potentially his freedom. The SEC investigation is still ongoing. Apex Capital learned this lesson. They lost $42 billion in assets, 68% of their client base, their competitive advantage. Gerald Morrison learned it too. Though last I heard, he's still there, trying to rebuild. Some lessons are expensive. Some cost everything. Make sure you're not the one paying tuition. Thanks for listening. Now go read your employment contract. Today, not tomorrow. You might be surprised what you agreed to.